The wagon wheel cracked like a gunshot in the frozen morning air, and Gemma Rosewood knew right then that she might die out here in the wilderness of Montana territory. She stood beside the broken wheel, her breath forming clouds in the bitter November cold of 1883, staring at the damage with a sinking heart. The mountain pass stretched before her, narrow and treacherous, already dusted with the first serious snowfall of the season. Behind her lay 3 days of travel from Pendleton, Montana, the small mining town where she had buried her father just a week ago. Ahead lay the promise of sanctuary with her aunt in Helena, still 2 weeks away by wagon under good conditions. But these were not good conditions, and now her wagon was crippled. Gemma pulled her wool coat tighter around her shoulders, fighting back the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. At 23 years old, she had never been truly alone before. Her father had always been there, protective and steady, even as the fever consumed him in those final terrible days. Now she stood in the middle of nowhere, with winter closing in like a fist, and no idea how to repair a broken wheel even if she had possessed the proper tools. The wind picked up, howling through the pine trees that lined the pass. Her horse whinnied nervously, stamping its hooves against the frozen ground. Gemma walked to the animal and stroked its neck, murmuring soft words of comfort she did not feel herself. She had enough food for perhaps another week if she rationed carefully. But the cold was the real enemy. Already her fingers ached inside her gloves, and the temperature would only drop further as night approached. She was contemplating whether to unhitch the horse and try riding it bareback toward Helena when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching from the direction she had come. Gemma's first instinct was fear. A woman alone on the frontier was vulnerable in ways she preferred not to dwell upon. She reached into the wagon and pulled out her father's old rifle, checking that it was loaded before turning to face whoever was coming. The rider appeared around the bend in the trail, sitting easy in his saddle despite the cold. He was tall, she could tell even from a distance, dressed in a heavy sheepskin coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the wind. As he drew closer, Gemma raised the rifle slightly, not quite pointing it at him but making sure he could see she was armed. "Easy there," the man called out, his voice carrying clear and calm across the distance. He pulled his horse to a stop about 20 feet away and slowly raised both hands to show they were empty. "I mean you no harm, miss. Saw your tracks heading into the pass and wanted to make sure you knew about the storm coming in." "Storm?" Gemma's voice sounded thin and scared even to her own ears. The man nodded, keeping his hands visible. "Big one, according to the sky and my old bones. Be here by nightfall, maybe sooner. This pass will be blocked solid by morning." He tilted his head, studying her broken wagon. "Looks like you have got trouble already." Gemma lowered the rifle slightly, something in the man's manner putting her marginally at ease. He had kind eyes, she thought, though it was hard to tell much about his features in the shadow of his hat. "The wheel broke about an hour ago. I do not suppose you know how to fix it." "I know how," he said, "but I do not know that we have got time before that storm hits." "May I come closer and take a look?" She nodded, and he dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who had spent most of his life on horseback. As he approached, Gemma got a better look at him. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with a weather-worn face that spoke of long days under the sun. Dark hair curled slightly under his hat, and his eyes were a striking shade of blue-gray, like storm clouds over distant mountains. There was something solid and dependable about him, a quality she could not quite name but instinctively trusted. "Owen Barrett," he said, tipping his hat to her. "I've got a ranch about 5 miles back the way you came, up in the high valley." "Gemma Rosewood," she replied. I am trying to reach Helena before winter sets in proper." Owen crouched beside the broken wheel, running his hands over the damage with the careful attention of someone who understood such things. After a moment, he stood and shook his head. "The hub is cracked clean through. Even if I had my tools, it would take the better part of a day to fix it right, and like I said, we do not have a day." "Then what do I do?" The panic was creeping back into her voice now. "I cannot just leave everything." "You cannot stay here either," Owen said firmly. "That storm is going to be a killer. I have seen it before, this time of year. The temperature will drop 20 degrees in a matter of hours, and the snow will come down so thick you will not be able to see your hand in front of your face." He glanced at the sky, where dark clouds were indeed beginning to gather in the north. "Your only chance is to come with me back to my ranch. We can take what supplies you need on the horses and ride double. Once the storm passes, I will come back with proper equipment and retrieve your wagon and the rest of your belongings." Gemma stared at him, torn between the instinct to trust this stranger and the voice of caution her father had always counseled. "I do not know you," she said quietly. "No, you do not," Owen agreed. "And I understand your hesitation, but I will give you my word, Miss Rosewood, that you will be safe under my roof. I have got a housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who lives in the cabin year-round. She will be there as chaperone if that eases your mind any. But we need to decide now, because that storm will not wait for us to get comfortable with each other." As if to punctuate his words, a gust of wind swept through the pass, so cold it took Gemma's breath away. She looked at the wagon, at the darkening sky, and then back at Owen Barrett's steady gaze. Her choices were simple and stark. Trust this stranger or die in the storm. "All right," she said, "but I need to bring my father's papers and some personal items." "Bring whatever you can carry in a pack," Owen said, already moving toward her wagon to help. "Anything heavy will have to wait." They worked quickly, with Owen proving remarkably efficient at determining what was essential and what could be left behind. He found a canvas pack in the back of her wagon and helped her fill it with clothes, her father's documents, a small wooden box containing her mother's jewelry, and as much food as would fit. Within 15 minutes, they had loaded both horses and Owen was helping Gemma up into his saddle. "You ride in front," he said. "I will sit behind and work the reins. Keep yourself tucked in close against the cold." Gemma settled into the saddle, intensely aware of Owen's presence as he swung up behind her. His arms came around on either side as he gathered the reins, and she could feel the warmth of his body through the layers of clothing they both wore. It was strangely intimate, being held this way by a man she had met mere minutes ago, but there was nothing improper in his manner. He was simply doing what needed to be done to keep them both alive. "Hold on," he said quietly, his breath warm against her ear. "We are going to move fast." They rode hard through the mountain pass, with Owen's second horse following on a lead rope. The wind grew stronger with each passing mile, and the first snowflakes began to fall, fat and heavy, catching in Gemma's eyelashes and melting against her cheeks. She pressed back against Owen's solid warmth, grateful for the shelter his body provided against the worst of the wind. True to his word, the ranch appeared after about an hour of hard riding. It was nestled in a high valley, protected on 3 sides by stands of pine and a steep ridgeline. The main house was built of logs, solid and well-maintained, with smoke already rising from its stone chimney. There was a barn nearby, and Gemma could see several other outbuildings scattered around the property. It was a working ranch, she realized, not just a cabin in the wilderness. Owen guided the horses straight to the barn, and as they rode through the door, a small Chinese woman appeared from the house, wrapped in a heavy shawl. "Mr. Owen," she called out, her English heavily accented but clear. I saw the storm coming and made extra stew. You are a wonder, Mrs. Chen, Owen replied, dismounting and then reaching up to help Gemma down. Her legs were stiff from the cold and the ride, and she stumbled slightly. Owen caught her easily, steadying her with gentle hands. This is Miss Gemma Rosewood. Her wagon broke down in the pass, so she will be staying with us until the storm clears and we can retrieve it. Mrs. Chen's weathered face broke into a warm smile. Welcome, Miss Rosewood. You come inside and get warm. Mr. Owen will see to the horses. I can help with the horses, Gemma protested, but Owen shook his head. You are half frozen already. Go with Mrs. Chen and warm yourself by the fire. I will be in shortly. Gemma wanted to argue, wanted to maintain some sense of self-sufficiency, but the truth was that her feet felt like blocks of ice, and her hands had lost most of their feeling. She followed Mrs. Chen across the yard to the house, ducking her head against the wind that now howled with increasing fury. The inside of Owen's house was a revelation. She had expected rough bachelor quarters, but instead found a well-kept home with furniture that, while simple, was crafted with care. The main room held a large stone fireplace where a fire crackled cheerfully, 2 comfortable-looking chairs, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, and shelves lined with books. The floor was made of smooth planks, covered here and there with braided rugs. It was warm and welcoming, a refuge from the storm. Sit, sit, Mrs. Chen urged, steering Gemma toward one of the chairs by the fire. I bring you hot tea and you warm up. Then we eat. Gemma sank into the chair, pulling off her gloves with clumsy fingers. The heat from the fire was almost painful against her frozen skin, but she welcomed it anyway. Through the window, she could see the snow falling harder now, the wind driving it nearly horizontal. They had made it just in time. Owen came in about 10 minutes later, stamping snow off his boots and hanging his coat and hat on pegs by the door. Without the hat, Gemma could see him properly for the first time. He was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and a jaw shadowed with stubble. But it was his eyes that held her attention, those blue-gray eyes that seemed to see right through her defenses to the frightened woman beneath. The horses are settled, he said, moving to the fire to warm his hands. Storm is really picking up now. We made good time. Thank you, Gemma said quietly. You saved my life today. Owen looked at her, and something passed between them in that moment, some recognition that went beyond gratitude and politeness. Could not have left you out there, he said simply, Mrs. Chen appeared with bowls of stew, thick with meat and vegetables, and chunks of fresh bread. They ate in companionable silence, the warmth of the food spreading through Gemma's body and finally driving out the last of the cold. Outside, the storm raged in full fury now, the wind screaming around the corners of the house and the snow piling up against the windows. How long do you think it will last? Gemma asked. Owen considered the question, his brow furrowing. Hard to say. Could be a day, could be 3. These early-season storms, they are unpredictable, but we have got plenty of supplies, so there is no need to worry. I am putting you out, Gemma said. You and Mrs. Chen, I am sorry. Nonsense, Mrs. Chen said briskly, collecting the empty bowls. Is good to have company. Mr. Owen, he is too much alone up here. A faint flush crept across Owen's cheeks, and Gemma found herself smiling despite everything. Do you run this ranch by yourself? She asked. Mostly, Owen replied. I've got a couple of hands who work for me during the busy seasons, but they head down to warmer country come November. It is just Mrs. Chen and me through the winter, keeping an eye on the small herd I keep in the lower pastures. Have you been ranching long? About 5 years now. I came out from Ohio after the war, did some cowboying for other outfits, and saved enough to buy this land. It is not much compared to some of the big spreads, but it is mine." There was quiet pride in his voice. "It is beautiful," Gemma said honestly. "Even in the storm, I could see how beautiful it is." They talked late into the evening, the conversation flowing easily despite their short acquaintance. Gemma found herself telling Owen about her father, about how he had been a surveyor who came to Montana Territory for work and stayed for the promise of gold, about how he had never struck it rich, but had been happy anyway. She told him about the fever that took him, about sitting by his bedside in that cramped room in Pendleton, holding his hand as he grew weaker. "He made me promise to go to my aunt in Helena," she said quietly. "He did not want me to be alone." Owen listened with an intensity that made her feel heard in a way she had not experienced in a long time. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment before speaking. "My parents are still back in Ohio," he said. "Good people, but they never understood why I needed to come west. My father wanted me to take over his mercantile, but I could not breathe in that little town anymore. I needed space, needed to build something of my own." He stared into the fire. "Spent 2 years as a soldier before I was old enough to know better, saw things no one should see. When it was over, I just wanted peace and quiet and honest work." There was pain in his voice, old wounds that had never quite healed. Gemma felt a surge of empathy for this man who had opened his home to her without hesitation. Mrs. Chen showed Gemma to a small bedroom off the main room, simple but clean, with a real bed and thick quilts. "You sleep well," the older woman said with a maternal pat on Gemma's shoulder. "Tomorrow, Storm will still be here, but you will feel better with rest." Alone in the room, Gemma changed into her nightgown and slipped under the quilts, listening to the storm rage outside. She thought about the strange turns life could take, how this morning she had been alone and terrified, and now she was safe and warm in the home of a stranger who was beginning not to feel like a stranger at all. The storm lasted 3 days. On the first day, Gemma woke to a world transformed. The snow had piled up past the windows, creating a dim, hushed atmosphere inside the house. Owen was already up, dressed and stoking the fire. He smiled when he saw her emerge from the bedroom. "Morning," he said. "Mrs. Chen is making breakfast. I need to go check on the livestock, make sure they weathered the night all right." "Can I help?" Gemma asked. Owen looked surprised. "It is brutal out there. The wind alone will knock you down if you are not careful." "I am stronger than I look," Gemma said. "And I have been on my own since my father died. I know how to work." Something shifted in Owen's expression, respect replacing doubt. "All right then. But you will need warmer clothes than what you have got. Mrs. Cheng can find you some of my old things. They will be too big, but they will keep you warm." Dressed in Owen's spare trousers, a thick wool shirt and a coat that hung nearly to her knees, Gemma followed him out into the storm. He had not been exaggerating about the wind. It hit her like a physical force, stealing her breath and making her eyes water instantly. But she set her jaw and pushed forward, following Owen's broad back as he forged a path through the deep snow toward the barn. The animals were fine, huddled together for warmth but with plenty of hay and water. Owen checked each one with careful attention, and Gemma helped where she could, learning the rhythms of ranch work. There was something deeply satisfying about the physical labor, about the way her body warmed despite the cold, about the simple act of caring for the horses and cattle. When they finally made it back to the house, they were both covered in snow and breathing hard. Mrs. Cheng clucked disapprovingly, but had hot coffee and breakfast waiting. They ate like starving people, the food tasting better than anything Gemma could remember. The rest of that first day passed in a strange kind of domestic tranquility. The storm made it impossible to do anything but stay inside, so Owen worked on mending tack while Gemma helped Mrs. Chen with various household tasks. But mostly they talked, the three of them, sharing stories and laughter. Gemma learned that Mrs. Chen had come to Montana Territory with her husband 15 years ago, following the railroad work. He had died in an accident 5 years back, and Owen had hired her when she found herself suddenly alone and in need of employment. "Mr. Owen, he is good man," Mrs. Chen said as they prepared supper together. "But he is lonely, I think. He works too hard, does not go to town enough, needs a wife." Gemma felt her cheeks warm. "I am sure he will find someone when he is ready." Mrs. Cheng gave her a knowing look but said nothing more. The second day of the storm brought slightly calmer winds but heavier snow. Owen spent the morning cutting firewood from the covered pile near the barn, and Gemma insisted on helping stack it inside the house. They worked in comfortable silence, their movements synchronized as if they had been doing this together for years rather than days. That evening, after Mrs. Chen had retired to her small room off the kitchen, Owen pulled out a worn chessboard. "You play?" he asked. "My father taught me," Gemma replied, "though I have not played in a long time." They set up the pieces and began. Owen was a skilled player, but Gemma held her own, the game stretching out for nearly 2 hours. As they played, they talked about everything and nothing, their words flowing as easily as the moves across the board. Gemma found herself watching Owen's hands as he moved the pieces, noticing the strength in his fingers, the careful way he handled even the smallest pawn. "Checkmate," Owen said finally, though his tone was more regretful than triumphant. "Well played," Gemma said. "Another game." They played 3 more games that night, with Gemma winning the last one. When she finally went to bed, she found herself lying awake, thinking not about the storm or her broken wagon or even her uncertain future, but about the way Owen's eyes crinkled when he smiled, about the sound of his laugh, about the feeling of safety she experienced in his presence. The third day dawned clear and bright, the storm finally spent. The world outside was buried under several feet of snow, transformed into something magical and pristine. Owen shoveled a path to the barn while Gemma helped Mrs. Chen with breakfast, and when they all sat down to eat, there was an unspoken understanding that something would have to change now that the weather had cleared. "I should try to continue to Helena," Gemma said, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. Owen set down his coffee cup carefully. "The pass will be impassable for weeks," he said, "maybe all winter. And even if it were not, your wagon is buried under snow right now. It will take a full day just to dig it out and another day after that to repair the wheel." "Then I will wait for the pass to clear," Gemma said, though her heart was not in the argument. "Winter has set in proper now," Owen continued. "It is November 23rd. You would not make it to Helena before the worst of the season hits. Miss Rosewood, I think you need to consider staying here until spring." The suggestion hung in the air between them. Gemma knew he was right, knew that attempting to reach Helena now would be suicide. But staying here in Owen's home for months, it was improper, even with Mrs. Chen as chaperone. People would talk. "I cannot impose on your hospitality for that long," she said quietly. "It would not be imposing," Owen said, and there was something in his voice that made her look up and meet his eyes. "I would like you to stay, Miss Rosewood. Not out of obligation, but because I have enjoyed your company these past few days more than I have enjoyed anyone's company in a very long time." Gemma's breath caught. There was no mistaking the meaning behind his words, the invitation they contained. "I do not know what to say." "Say you will stay," Owen said simply. "Stay through the winter, help with the ranch work if you like or do not, just stay." "Yes," Gemma heard herself saying. Yes, I will stay. Mrs. Chen beamed at them both, looking far too pleased with herself. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt natural and right. Gemma threw herself into ranch work with enthusiasm, learning from Owen how to care for the livestock, how to read the weather, how to fix broken equipment and mend fences, and all the 100 other tasks that kept a ranch running through winter. Owen proved to be a patient teacher, never condescending, always willing to show her again if she did not understand the first time. But it was not just work. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes playing chess, sometimes just talking. Owen told her about his dreams for the ranch, about wanting to expand his herd, about maybe breeding horses one day. Gemma talked about her childhood, about her mother who had died when she was young, about her love of reading and her secret desire to write stories herself. Why secret? Owen asked one evening as they sat together, the fire crackling low. Because it seems frivolous, Gemma admitted. Women are supposed to want practical things, useful things, not stories. I do not think stories are frivolous, Owen said. They are how we understand the world, how we make sense of our lives. You should write them if you want to. Something in Gemma's chest loosened at his words, at the simple permission he gave her to want something just for herself. December arrived with more snow and bitter cold, but inside Owen's house, warmth and something deeper was growing. Gemma caught herself watching Owen more and more, noticing the way his hair curled when it was damp, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, the way her heart raced when their hands accidentally touched while working together. One evening in mid-December, they were sitting by the fire after supper. Mrs. Chen had already gone to bed, and the house was quiet except for the wind outside. Owen was reading, and Gemma was attempting to write in a journal he had given her, but she could not concentrate. Finally, she set down her pen. "Owen," she said, and he looked up immediately at the sound of his name. It was the first time she had used it without the formal Mr. in front of it. "Can I ask you something? Anything," he said, setting aside his book. "Why did you really ask me to stay?" "The truth." Owen was quiet for a long moment, the firelight casting shadows across his face. When he spoke, his voice was low and sincere. "Because from the moment I saw you standing by that broken wagon, rifle in hand and fear in your eyes but refusing to give up, I felt something I have never felt before. And these past weeks with you have only made that feeling stronger. I know it is too soon. I know I should not be saying this, but Gemma, I am falling in love with you." Gemma's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "It is not too soon," she whispered, "because I am falling in love with you too." Owen stood and crossed to where she sat, kneeling beside her chair so they were eye to eye. "I do not have much to offer," he said. "Just this ranch and hard work and a life that will not always be easy, but I would spend every day trying to make you happy, trying to be worthy of you." "You already are worthy," Gemma said, reaching out to cup his face with her hand. "You are the best man I have ever known." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, but pulling away was the last thing Gemma wanted. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet and perfect, a kiss that tasted of promise and hope and future. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. "Marry me," Owen said. "Not now, not until you are sure, but someday. Say you will marry me, Gemma." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They sat together by the fire for hours that night, talking about the future, making plans, stealing kisses that grew gradually less innocent. It was Mrs. Chen who finally emerged from her room, wrapped in her nightgown and shawl, clearing her throat loudly. "You two should sleep," she said, though her eyes were twinkling. "Plenty of time for courting tomorrow." Gemma and Owen separated reluctantly, but as Gemma lay in bed that night, she felt happier than she had in years. The path that had brought her here had been painful, filled with loss and fear, but it had led her to Owen, and she could not bring herself to regret a single step. Christmas came, and they celebrated simply but joyfully. Owen and Gemma rode out in the crisp winter air to cut a small pine tree, which they decorated with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments. Mrs. Chen showed them how to fold. Owen had ridden down to the lower valley a week earlier, to a neighbor's ranch, and traded for some supplies, including a bolt of deep blue fabric that he presented to Gemma on Christmas morning. "For a dress," he said. "Mrs. Chen said it would match your eyes." "It is beautiful," Gemma breathed, running her hands over the soft material. "Thank you." She gave him a leather-bound journal in which she had written a story, the first she had completed in years. It was about a woman lost in the wilderness and the man who saved her, though in her version they were battling monsters made of snow and ice. Owen read it that evening while she watched nervously, and when he finished, his eyes were bright with emotion. "This is incredible," he said. "You have real talent, Gemma. Promise me you will keep writing." "I promise," she said, and meant it. January and February passed in a blur of hard work and growing love. The ranch required constant attention during the worst of the winter, and there were days when the cold was so brutal they could barely manage the necessary chores before retreating back to the house. But there were also moments of beauty, of standing together watching the sunset turn the snow-covered mountains pink and gold, of waking to find the trees covered in ice that sparkled like diamonds, of quiet evenings spent in each other's company. Owen courted her properly, with all the respect and patience her father would have demanded. They talked about everything, learning each other's minds and hearts. Gemma discovered that Owen loved poetry, that he could recite Longfellow from memory. Owen learned that Gemma had a wicked sense of humor and could make him laugh until his sides ached. They discovered that they both wanted children, that they both believed in working hard but also in making time for joy, that they both valued honesty and kindness above all else. Mrs. Chen watched their courtship with maternal approval, and one evening in late February she pulled Gemma aside while Owen was out checking on a cow that was due to calf. "You love him, yes?" the older woman asked. "More than anything," Gemma admitted. "And he loves you. I see it in his face when he looks at you. So why wait? You should marry now before spring comes." "I thought we would wait until I could send word to my aunt," Gemma said. "Let her know I am well and happy." "Your aunt will understand," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "Life is too short to waste time when you know what you want. You and Mr. Owen, you belong together. Anyone can see it." That night, Gemma broached the subject with Owen. They were sitting together on the rug in front of the fire, Gemma leaning back against his chest, his arms wrapped around her waist. "Mrs. Chen thinks we should marry soon," she said. "Not wait for spring." She felt Owen's heartbeat quicken against her back. "What do you think?" he asked carefully. "I think she is right," Gemma said, turning in his arms so she could see his face. "I know what I want, Owen. I want you. I want this life. Why should we wait?" Owen's smile was brilliant, transforming his face. "There is a circuit preacher who comes through the lower valley. I could ride down and ask when he will be back this way." "Do it," Gemma said. "Let's get married." The kiss that followed was deep and full of promise, and when they finally broke apart, both were breathless. Owen made the ride the next day, and returned with news that the preacher would be passing through in 3 weeks, on his way to Pendleton. He could perform the ceremony at the Barrett ranch if Owen wished. 3 weeks, Owen said, pulling Gemma into his arms. "In 3 weeks, you will be my wife." "I can hardly wait," she whispered against his chest. Those 3 weeks passed in a flurry of preparation. Mrs. Chen and Gemma worked together to make a dress from the blue fabric Owen had given her for Christmas, stitching by firelight in the evenings. It was simple but elegant, with a high collar and long sleeves, and when Gemma tried it on for the final fitting, even Mrs. Chen had tears in her eyes. "You look like Angel," the older woman said. Owen arranged for his neighbors from the lower valley to attend, 3 families who had been kind to him over the years. It would not be a large wedding, but it would be witnessed and celebrated, which was all that mattered. The night before the wedding, Gemma could not sleep. She lay in bed, thinking about how much her life had changed since that day in November when her wagon wheel broke. She had lost so much in the years before, her mother, her father, the familiar comforts of the life she had known. But she had found something too, something precious and rare. She had found Owen, and with him, she had found home. The morning of March 16, 1884, dawned clear and cold but with a hint of coming spring in the air. The snow was beginning to melt in patches, revealing the brown grass beneath, and Gemma could hear the sound of water running in the streams, ice breaking up after the long freeze. Mrs. Chen helped her dress, pinning up her dark hair and placing a circlet of dried flowers on her head. When Gemma looked at herself in the small mirror, she barely recognized the confident, happy woman staring back. This was not the frightened girl who had stood by a broken wagon months ago. This was someone stronger, someone who had found her place in the world. The ceremony took place in Owen's living room, with the fire crackling cheerfully and the neighbors crowded in to witness. Owen stood waiting for her, dressed in his best suit, his eyes never leaving her face as she crossed the room to stand beside him. The preacher was an elderly man with kind eyes, and his words were simple but profound. "Do you, Owen Jedediah Barrett, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death do you part?" "I do," Owen said, his voice strong and sure. "And do you, Gemma Rosewood, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death do you part?" "I do," Gemma said, her heart so full she thought it might overflow. "Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Owen's kiss was tender and sweet, a promise sealed before God and witnesses. When they broke apart, the small crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and Gemma found herself laughing and crying at the same time. The celebration that followed was joyful and full of warmth. Mrs. Chen had prepared a feast, somehow creating wonders from their limited winter stores. There was music, one of the neighbors having brought a fiddle and dancing in the cramped space of the living room. Owen held Gemma close as they danced, his arms strong around her, and she rested her head against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him, feeling utterly content. As the sun set and the neighbors prepared to make the journey back to their own homes, they offered congratulations and promises to visit again in the spring. Mrs. Chen discreetly retired to her room early, and then Owen and Gemma were finally alone, husband and wife. "Hello, Mrs. Barrett," Owen said softly, pulling her into his arms. "Hello, Mr. Barrett," she replied, smiling up at him. He led her to his bedroom, which was now their bedroom, and what followed was tender and passionate and perfect, a physical joining that mirrored the emotional and spiritual bond they had already formed. They explored each other with wonder and care, learning the landscape of each other's bodies, expressing with touch what words could never fully convey. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, talking in whispers, making plans and promises. "I want to give you the world," Owen murmured, pressing kisses to her temple, her cheek, her lips. "You already have," Gemma replied. "You have given me everything I need." Spring came gradually to the Montana mountains, the snow melting to reveal the land beneath. Owen and Gemma worked together to prepare the ranch for the busy season ahead, repairing fences, checking on the cattle that had survived the winter, planning for the future. In April, Owen made the trip back to where Gemma's wagon still sat, and with help from his neighbors, he brought it back to the ranch. Everything inside was just as they had left it, preserved by the cold. Gemma retrieved her father's papers and her mother's jewelry box, and she spent an afternoon going through them, remembering and grieving and finally letting go. Owen sat with her through it all, holding her when she cried, listening when she needed to talk. That evening, she wrote a letter to her aunt in Helena, explaining everything that had happened, telling her about Owen and the wedding and her happiness. "I am sorry I never made it to you," she wrote, "but I think this is where I was meant to be all along." Perhaps Father knew, somehow, that the path to Helena would lead me home. They sent the letter with a supply wagon heading north in early May and received a reply 6 weeks later. Her aunt was overjoyed for her, understanding completely, and invited them both to visit in the summer if they could spare the time from the ranch. "We will go," Owen promised. "She is family, and family is important." By summer, Gemma was pregnant, a fact that filled them both with joy and trepidation. Owen became even more protective, insisting she not work too hard, worrying over every little thing. Gemma bore his concern with good humor, understanding it came from love, but also insisting she was not made of glass. They did make the trip to Helena in July, traveling carefully and staying with Gemma's aunt for 2 weeks. The older woman fell in love with Owen immediately, declaring him the best thing that could have happened to her niece. They returned to the ranch renewed and happy, ready for whatever the future would bring. Gemma's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and on a cold February morning in 1885, with Mrs. Chen attending and Owen pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Henry Rosewood Barrett after Gemma's father, and Owen cried when he held his son for the first time. "Thank you," he whispered to Gemma, who was exhausted but radiant. "Thank you for this gift, for everything." "Thank you for saving me," she whispered back, "for guiding me home." The years that followed were full and rich, a tapestry woven from hard work and deep love. Gemma and Owen grew the ranch together, expanding the herd, building a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. 2 more children followed Henry, a daughter named Margaret in 1887 and another son named Thomas in 1889. The little house in the valley rang with the sound of children's laughter, and Owen built additions to accommodate their growing family. Gemma continued to write, her stories finding their way into magazines back east, bringing in a modest income but more importantly, bringing her joy. Owen was endlessly proud of her, showing off her published work to anyone who would listen. The children grew strong and healthy, learning to ride almost before they could walk, learning to work the ranch alongside their parents. Mrs. Chen remained with them through all of it, becoming grandmother in all but name to the Barrett children, her sharp eyes and gentle wisdom an integral part of their lives. She taught the children to fold paper animals and to cook traditional dishes from her homeland. And when she passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1895, the entire family mourned her deeply. They buried her on a hill overlooking the valley, beneath a pine tree where she had loved to sit in the evenings. The ranch continued to prosper through the 1890s and into the new century. Owen and Gemma added a foreman and several hands, allowing them to expand their operations. Their children grew into capable young adults, with Henry showing a natural talent for ranching, Margaret inheriting her mother's way with words, and Thomas proving to have a gift for training horses. On a warm evening in June of 1903, Owen and Gemma sat together on the porch they had added to the house years earlier, watching the sun set over the mountains. They were both in their early 40s now, their hair showing threads of silver, their bodies marked by years of hard work. But when Owen reached for Gemma's hand and she laced her fingers through his, the gesture was as natural and loving as it had been on their wedding day 19 years earlier. "Do you ever think about that day in the past?" Owen asked. "When your wagon broke down?" "Sometimes," Gemma said. "I think about how terrified I was, how lost I felt, and then I think about how you appeared like an answer to a prayer I had not even known to say." "I think about it too," Owen admitted. "I almost did not ride up that day. I was busy with work and there was plenty to do at the ranch, but something told me to go to check the pass. I have always thought that was Providence bringing you to me." "Or bringing me home," Gemma said softly. "Because that is what this place is, Owen. What you are, home." He pulled her close, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. From inside the house, they could hear the murmur of their children's voices, arguing good-naturedly about something. The sounds of family, of life, of love. "I never thanked you properly," Owen said suddenly. "For what?" "For trusting me that day. For taking a chance on a stranger. For choosing this life, even when it was hard. For giving me a family, a purpose, a reason to be grateful every single day." Gemma turned to look at him, seeing the emotion in his eyes. "You do not need to thank me for any of that. You gave me just as much, Owen. More, maybe. You gave me a home when I had none, love when I needed it most, and a life more beautiful than any I could have imagined." "We gave it to each other," Owen said. "That is what love is, I think. Not one person saving another, but both of them choosing each other, again and again, through all the seasons of life." He kissed her then, and it still had the power to make her heart race, to make her feel young and cherished and infinitely precious. Inside the house, Henry called out that supper was ready, and with a shared smile, Owen and Gemma rose and went inside, ready for whatever the evening would bring. More years passed, marked by joy and occasional sorrow, by growth and change and the steady passage of time. Henry married a schoolteacher from Pendleton and brought her to the ranch, where Owen deeded them a portion of land to build their own home. Margaret moved to Helena to pursue her writing career, finding success as a novelist and journalist, though she visited often. Thomas took over the horse breeding operation, building it into something remarkable, his animals sought after throughout Montana and beyond. Owen and Gemma became grandparents, and then grandparents many times over, their home always full of visiting children and grandchildren, noise and laughter and love. They aged together gracefully, their bodies slowing but their love never diminishing, only deepening with time. On a spring morning in 1921, Owen and Gemma celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary. They were in their 60s now, both still active but content to leave the hardest ranch work to their children and grandchildren. They spent the day together, riding out to their favorite spot overlooking the valley, just the two of them like in the old days. 37 years, Gemma marveled. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like forever. "Best 37 years of my life," Owen said, helping her down from her horse. They settled on a blanket Henry had packed for them, along with a picnic lunch prepared by Margaret's eldest daughter who had a gift for cooking. "You have any regrets?" Gemma asked. "Anything you wish you had done differently?" Owen thought about it for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "Not a single one. This life, this family, it is everything I ever wanted and more than I thought I deserved." "You deserve it all," Gemma said firmly. "You are a good man, Owen Barrett, the best man I have ever known." They ate their lunch and talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in the way only people who have spent decades together can be. They talked about their children and grandchildren, about the ranch's future, about the changes they had seen in the world around them. Montana had been a territory when they married, had become a state in 1889. They had seen the wild frontier slowly become civilized, had watched as automobiles began to appear even in remote areas like theirs. But some things never changed. The mountains still stood tall and proud. The stream still rang clear and cold. And the valley that had been their home for nearly 4 decades was as beautiful as ever. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Owen pulled Gemma close and they sat together, watching the day end. "I love you," Owen said quietly. "I have loved you from the moment I saw you, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Gemma replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "You guided me through that first winter, Owen, but you have been my guide through every season since. You have made my life beautiful." "We made it beautiful together," Owen corrected gently. They sat there as the stars came out. Two souls who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life together brick by brick, season by season, year by year. They had weathered storms both literal and figurative, had faced hardships and celebrated triumphs, and through it all, their love had remained constant and true. When they finally rode back to the house as twilight deepened into night, their family was waiting for them, 3 generations gathered to celebrate. There was a feast laid out, and music, and so much love it seemed to fill every corner of the room. Owen and Gemma stood together, his arm around her waist, her hand resting over his heart, and looked out at the family they had created. "This," Gemma whispered to Owen, "this is what happiness looks like." "Yes," Owen agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "This is what love built." They danced that evening, just as they had at their wedding so many years ago, and if their steps were slower now, if their bodies were marked by time, it did not matter. What mattered was the love that still shone in their eyes when they looked at each other, the tenderness in their touch, the absolute certainty that they were exactly where they belonged. Many more years of contentment followed, with Owen and Gemma growing old together in the house where they had built their life. They watched their grandchildren grow and have children of their own, seeing the ranch continue into its 3rd generation under Barrett's stewardship. They saw the world change in ways they could never have imagined, but their love remained a constant, an anchor in the shifting tides of time. Owen passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1932, at the age of 76, surrounded by his family with Gemma holding his hand. His last words were, "I love you," spoken to the woman who had been his partner, his love, his home for 48 years. Gemma grieved deeply, but without regret, knowing they had been blessed with a love most people only dreamed of. She lived another 5 years, spending her time writing her memoirs, telling the story of the day her wagon broke down in a mountain pass, and a cowboy appeared to save her life, and in doing so, gave her a life worth living. She passed away quietly in the spring of 1937, sitting in her chair by the fire, pen in hand, a smile on her face. Her children found her that way, and when they read what she had been writing, they found these final words. "In the end, love was the journey and the destination, the question and the answer, the winter storm and the warmth that saw me through. I needed a guide through that first terrible winter, and Owen guided me straight into his waiting arms. What a beautiful journey it has been. They buried Gemma next to Owen on the hill overlooking the valley, beneath the wide Montana sky, and their great-grandchildren laid wildflowers on the grave. The ranch continued, generation after generation, but the story of Owen and Gemma became legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren, a testament to the power of love found in the most unexpected places, in the hardest of seasons, between two souls meant to find each other. The house still stood decades later, expanded and modernized but still recognizable, still filled with love and family, and the echoes of the laughter and joy that Owen and Gemma had first brought to that remote valley. And on winter evenings, when the snow fell and the wind howled through the mountain pass, you could almost see them there, standing together by the firelight, forever young, forever in love, forever home.